Welcome to everybody. This is Vote.je's question time, and tonight I'm going Garfield Bennett, by the way. We're going to be joined by the candidates for Deputy for Grouville and St Martin. Welcome everybody, thanks for joining us, and thank you at home for joining us for the question time. First of all, I'm just going to introduce the candidates. So on my left I've got Rose Binet, who is an independent.
Good evening.
Guy DeFay is also independent.
Hi, I'm Guy.
Carolyn Labby, again, independent.
Good evening.
Steve Luce is Progress Party.
Good evening.
And Piers Songon, who is independent.
Good evening.
And there is one candidate missing from the room tonight. Unfortunately, Philip Leclerc, who is Jersey Alliance candidate, is unable to join us this evening. So that would make 7 candidates for the 2 parishes in the one constituency. 6, sorry, I can't count, can I? That's why I became a journalist and not a mathematician. Okay, so I'm just going to explain to you a few things about this evening. So the rules of this: each candidate will get 1 minute to answer your questions. So please start asking your questions now online. You can also upvote the questions that you think should be answered first. I want you to keep them brief, the questions. Please say what your name is and which parish you're from, because we obviously will try to prioritise the Grouville and St Martin questions. And don't ask questions which are clearly aimed at single candidates, because we want to be fair to all candidates here and ask questions of everybody and not sort of pick out on particular people. So we're going to start off. Have we got any questions coming in already? Let's have a look. We've got people online. I can't actually see the questions, unfortunately. I think it's the view. Okay. No. So we haven't got any questions from people. So come on, people, start asking your questions. Oh, Julian Cousins has come in. Okay, first of all, first question, I'm going to ask Rose the question first. Kevin Keane says in today's JP that there is a staffing crisis mainly fueled by unaffordable accommodation in Jersey. How would the candidates address this? I'm going to start with Rose, please.
I think it's very difficult. I think I'd have to look into where we could house the members of staff that we need to have. That's all I can really say about that at the moment. Okay, thank you. Guy?
Well, this is an extremely complicated issue in reality. We have unemployed people who are probably quite competent to work. There is a heavy demand amongst a number of local industries for foreign labour from all parts of the world these days. And that in itself is a sort of double whammy. It's a benefit in terms of these people work for lower wages than local people might accept. But of course, every time you bring workers in from elsewhere, they need somewhere to live. I was quite interested in the idea of setting up some sort of temporary camp, village aimed at temporary foreign workers. But I just felt it was basically a business opportunity.
Thank you, Guy. I'm afraid that's your minute. Thank you very much. Carolyn.
Thank you. I believe we do have a staffing crisis, predominantly because of the housing crisis, and there's quite a few things that are interlinked with this. We have a finite amount of space. We have an extremely successful economy. People are living longer, and the cost of living and prices have gone up hugely, especially in the last couple of years post-COVID. So I would agree we do. There's no silver bullet to solve this issue. It's extremely complex. In the government, we have brought about some levers, some migration policies to make it more difficult for staff to stay here beyond the 5 years to gain qualifications. So they will not gain qualifications in order to reside in the island permanently.
Thank you. Thanks, Carolyn. It's your minute up as well. Steve.
Thank you. Yes, well, I can't disagree that we have a housing crisis in Jersey, and the price of housing, whether you're to purchase or to rent, is very high. That's driven by demand, and I've always said that I think it's a question, very basic question of supply and demand, and if we had more accommodation, if we had more houses, the price would ease, and that would be reflected in rental prices, and that would make them more affordable. But it's extremely unfortunate that we have people who work at the coalface, not literally, but on the front line, are leaving because they find rental prices high, and they find the cost of living extremely difficult to cope with on their small wages. They're doing 1 job, 2 jobs, some even 3. But for me, the fundamental issue is that we need to increase the supply so we can reduce demand and therefore ease the pressure on prices of housing throughout the spectre.
Thank you very much. And Piers.
Yeah, there's no argument that it's a very complicated issue. It's a combination of housing, the cost of living, but also wage capping, which is something I've come across where for certain industries, people aren't willing to pay above a certain point for the service. That actually prevents you from attracting new people into the island because they're looking for the higher wage to access the housing and access the cost of living. So it's an interesting balance that we've got of where the wages are, the housing and the cost of living, that it's all mixed together. And yeah, as has been said, there's no silver bullet.
Okay, thank you very much. And for those people who are just joining us now, we are asking all the candidates questions as we go around the room for 1 minute. And please get your questions in now, because you can do so by writing in the box. We will ask the questions to people. Philip Leclerc isn't able to join us this evening, unfortunately. Okay, so next question is from Beverly Lequiro, who is a Grouville resident. She said, could the candidates please tell us, if elected, how they would specifically support the growth of small businesses, and what do they think the main issues for small businesses are? And that will go first to Guy.
Well, interestingly, I've tried to do this many years ago, kicking off with the people who start small businesses, which are single freelancers. And Jersey, for a very long time, has had a rather odd approach to single freelance workers, not being able to decide whether they're employers or employees. So they ended up paying rather a lot of social security contributions. I think that's the first thing we need to look at, because it's the single freelance workers who then start employing other people, and that's how small businesses get off the ground. I think there's no reason why we couldn't allow certain tax breaks for small businesses. I had a client some years ago trying to stay in telecoms, and I spoke to our economic advisor today and said, look, you keep talking about a level playing field. What we want is a tilted playing field, biased to the little guy.
Thank you. That's some phrasing minutes up. Carolyn.
Thank you. Yes, I most certainly support small businesses. I believe that they're the lifeblood of our community and they need support. Jersey Business, I feel, offers them a certain amount of support now, which government have set up in order to see them through establishing, because I believe there is still too much red tape for small businesses, or any businesses, in fact, in setting up in Jersey. The way I would support them is, as Guy was saying, probably with social security breaks initially, and possibly tax breaks, but I'd have to look into that further. But certainly help with social security whilst they're in the setting up phase.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Steve?
Yes, I think the candidates before me have got it pretty much right. The biggest difficulty for a small business starting up is always going to be cash flow. It's retaining enough business in your, retaining enough money in your business to pay your staff and to pay your bills. And those regular bills do include social security, which is a major factor. So we need to look at some ways to help small businesses through their social security payments, maybe a way of lending them some money for a small period of time so they can make returns on investment and things like that. But I think it's really important to try to help small business. Jersey is an island of entrepreneurs. It's become exceedingly difficult to be an entrepreneur in Jersey, and red tape is responsible for a lot of that. So we need to come up with ways to make it easier for small businesses to keep the cash in the business for the first few months of their existence.
Thank you. Piers.
Well, actually, as a small business owner, which I started up my company 10 years ago, I do have some experience in this. And although when you first start off a small business, you do actually get 2 years break where you don't need to pay Social Security. You're then attacked with you're paying your Social Security is based on what you earned 2 years ago. And that's a big thing that I've got an issue with. And I've actually said this in my manifesto. I would like to see the Class 2 contributions move to same as Class 1. So it's pay as you earn in a set percentage rather than based on what you earned 2 years ago. And that would also mean that when we go through things like pandemics or there's a shortfall in the company, you're not still having to pay Social Security that you were based on what you earned 2 years ago.
Thank you. Rose.
I agree with what the other candidates have had to say. I agree with supporting small business, and I also think if we could try and cut down on the red tape, as Carolyn had mentioned, it would be very helpful, because it's an absolute minefield to get through what government demands of small businesses and all businesses, really.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the next question. Peter Hargreaves has asked, what is your reaction to the apparent approval of the Overdale development? So it's going to start with Carolyn.
Sorry, can you repeat?
What is your reaction to the apparent approval of the Overdale
the hospital
development
site? Yeah. Okay. Well, we need a hospital. We've gone through this. We've been looking at sites for 10 years now, and we've finally got permission to build a hospital. If I asked 10 people which site they would prefer, I'd get 10 different answers. I think now's the time that we have got to get on and build a hospital, because the conditions that we're expecting our medical staff, nursing staff to work in are completely unacceptable at this point. And if we go on beyond 2026, then I'm afraid it's going to cost us millions, absolutely millions, just to maintain, just to do nothing, maintain what we've got. So I think the time has come where we have simply got to get on and build it.
Thank you. Steve?
Well, I disagree, because I think using the excuse of getting on and building in the wrong site is not a good enough reason to build at Overdale. I've always said I thought it was the wrong site. And my reaction when I heard the announcement that the Minister had approved Overdale was one of great sadness. I almost felt physically ill for a couple of hours, because it's something I've considered greatly over the years. I've always been a great fan of Gloucester Street. We have a hospital there. It's easy to access. People know where it is. And the amount of money we've spent on Overdale in the last 2 years would have bought a lot of Kensington Place. We could have a big site. We could be doing a really fantastic job there where people are used to going. So I'm extremely disappointed. Overdale, the worst reason for it is that it's not easy to access. And why would anybody build a hospital in a place where it's difficult to get to? I'm very, very disappointed, and we'll have to see where we go.
Thank you, Piers.
The decision's been made. Whether it's right, wrong, that's everyone's own opinion on where the right place was. Having just had my second daughter born in the hospital in the maternity ward, which is an active building site at the moment, I couldn't think of anything worse than that happening to the entire hospital. So the priority now is the decision's been made. We just need to deliver it, and importantly for the next State Assembly, make sure it's delivered under budget and actually make sure we can save some money on it.
I agree with Stephen, actually. I'm very unhappy with the decision having been made so very late in the day. I disagree with where it's going to be built. I think the process of getting to the site of Overdale is very suspect. It seems to me that Overdale was chosen and an awful lot of money was spent in coming up with ridiculous nonsense of other sites like St Andrew's Park, you know, knowing full well that they were going to build it at Overdale in the end. I think the access is horrendous. The environmental damage will be dreadful, and I believe we have to have under tarmac heating to keep the road going up to Overdale at great expense, just in case we have some point where it's very icy. I disagree with it entirely.
Thank you. Guy?
Well, the decision is the wrong decision. It shouldn't have been made, and it's absolutely ridiculous to carry on with a bad decision. It has to be stopped. It's a folly. There is potential for hospital development at Overdale, and I'll keep it as brief as possible. Overdale should be where inpatients and the operating theatres and heavy scanner equipment are located. Accident, emergency and outpatient should stay at Gloucester Street in our current general hospital, and that needs redesigning and renovating. But it is ludicrous to ask people around the island to travel up a steep hill to access outpatients when the current setup is absolutely fine. We knew 10 years ago under the first Health Minister, well, under Health Minister Anne Bright, we needed 2 hospitals. So let's have 2 inpatients at Overdale, the rest where it is.
Thank you very much. Okay, and just for those joining us from home, we have the candidates here, but we don't have Philip Leclerc. Unfortunately, he's unable to join us this evening. Please do get your questions in. We will try to get to as many people as possible with your questions. So I'm going to stay with health in a certain sense. The healthcare plan includes transferring tasks to the community. Is this just transferring the work to charities, says Jane? So I'll go with you, Steve, first on that one.
I very much fear that it is, Jane, and the care package that's being proposed certainly puts an awful lot more emphasis, maybe up to a third, on the third sector to the charitable sector. And what government is expecting is that those charities will pick up the slack. And while some of those charities, and let's think about one that is easy to visualise, if you like, hospice, are providing a fantastic service. They will provide that service into the future, I very much hope. But they're going to need a proper service level agreement, and they're going to need proper funding from government. It's absolutely wrong to move forward with a care model which pushes so much emphasis onto the third sector without showing and without telling them how much funding government are going to give them to provide the services they're going to ask for.
Thank you. Yes.
I still need to do more research into both care model, but from what I've seen already, my biggest concern is what's the funding backing it up. Particularly so I'm worried that if there's not funding there, we are effectively going to be capping the potential wages of those staff who are actually working in the care sector. Again, making it difficult for it to be seen as a viable career option, and then putting more strain on us actually trying to get staff into the island to actually undertake the care. So I've got quite concerned, and I need to know more about how much money is going to be put in and where's it coming from.
Thank you, Rose.
I'm not happy with the care model at all. I think it is shoving the responsibility of government off onto charities. The charities, as far as I'm aware, are not actually regulated or checked on what sort of level of service that they are providing to people. Funding is scattergun. Some people get money and some people don't, depending on whether you're liked or not. I think it's when I went to the care model presentation, they wouldn't take questions. Not once were doctors mentioned who provide 80% of care in the community. I think doctors have been very much ignored over the last few years. They haven't had proper funding, and then they are saying that doctors can take on more responsibilities without even really consulting with them. So I think it's a disaster.
Thank you, Guy.
Well, let's start at the top. The health department is probably the most dysfunctional in government. I'm not at all convinced that the new idea of getting GPs to cover everything is a brilliant one, but we'll see. But they are very expensive, especially if you want to call them out. In terms of the charitable side of things, well, the government has just been leaning on the charities for years and years and years, taking advantage of people's goodwill. And let me also say quickly a word for carers. And I'm talking about people, some of them in their teens, looking after elderly relatives who may have mental health issues. And that area is appalling. not simply in terms of the cost of caring for elderly folk at home, but also, don't forget, these people need some time out. They need respite care, and the opportunities for respite are few and far between, and hundreds are suffering.
Thank you. Carolyn.
Thank you. Jersey care model is something that I am not 100% behind, I must confess, because I just don't know if it's going to work, because as we alluded to in the first question, there is a staffing shortage. So if we have enough staff to run the Jersey care model, that is great. But the £9 million was given to the primary care, the doctors' surgeries. It's a 4-year package, and they are going to develop their practices and provide nurses and other staff, so that when you go to the doctor, you don't always have to go and see the doctor. You can see others there. So doctors' surgeries are going to be developed, and government is supporting that initiative. So that I'm fully behind, but it's the respite cares guys.
Thank you, Carolyn. Sorry.
Thank you.
You're up on your minute, I'm afraid. Steve.
So I thought I'd answered.
Oh, you did answer. You took me through with that. Okay, right, you did. I started with you. You can go again. Yeah, yeah, right. There's an awful lot of things to answer. So go on. Yeah, okay. So any people who are joining us from home, I know I can see that there's more people joining us. Please do get your questions in for the candidates, and you cannot vote questions. I am trying to ask a variety of questions from different people, so I'm not going to keep asking questions from the same person, but I will get round to everybody's questions if we have time. So this one is from, I'm not sure if it's Brian or Ryan, because you've got two different names on here, from St Martin's. He said, if the proposal to decriminalise the possession, use and personal cultivation of cannabis were to arrive, how would the candidates currently vote? So that goes to Piers first.
Right, I've had a fantastic chat with cannabis prohibition guys, and I'm fully supportive of working to improve access for medicinal cannabis use. When it comes to personal cannabis use, I think I need to have more discussions and know a bit more about the subject. It's not something I'm familiar with.
Okay, thank you. Rose?
I'm not against decriminalising personal cannabis use, but I would be a bit dubious of doing it just as Jersey without sort of either UK or other jurisdictions doing it, because I'm not quite sure what it would lead to if we just decriminalise cannabis on our own.
Okay, Guy.
35 years ago, when I was working for Channel Television, I was approached by local marijuana smokers who said they knew that heroin was starting to come into the island. They knew who the dealers were and they wanted to do something about it, but they were frightened to talk to the police because what they were doing was also illegal. Could I do something? I said, well, I'm afraid not, because the police will simply ask me, where did you get the information from? Tobacco, if it turned up now, would be a Class A drug. It's highly addictive. Marijuana is not. It's what's called habit forming. And some people suggest that certain marijuana plants can actually have health benefits. I thought that we would probably legalise cannabis 20 years ago. We still haven't.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Yes, I'm most certainly very much for medicinal cannabis on prescription. I think it's got proven benefits to those in pain relief and those who wish to take it. So I cannot see any reason not to decriminalise it. Personal use, I mean, there's no logical reason really to decriminalise that. Well, I say criminalise it when, you know, it's probably got the same effect as a glass of wine. So most certainly medicinal, a bit like Piers. I think I'd like to go into a bit more about personal use.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Yes, well, I don't see any, there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be using this drug for the best medicinal purposes, because it is proven that it helps. And some people who can find no alternative are already benefiting from it. So that is one section, but the recreational is something else altogether. And certainly during my time on the youth panel, I saw people come in front of me who had started with marijuana and had moved on, and some got into criminal activity, others had medical issues through smoking too much. So I have to say for myself at this time, I accept that there's a market out there, and if we decriminalised it, opened it up, it could be good for the island in some ways. But for me at the moment, I'd like to see fast follower rather than leading the way on this one.
Thank you very much. Okay, and just a reminder, it'd be good to get some more questions which are specific to the parishes of Grouville and St Martin. But I'm going to go to Katie's question next. What do you think is the single biggest failing of the Alliance government over the 4 years, and what would you do differently in government? So I'll go to Rose first on that one.
I think the biggest failing is not retaining staff, particularly at the hospital. You know, I hear people that it's all very well building a new hospital, but if we haven't got anyone to staff it, and I think there's an awful lot of unhappy sort of civil servants in teaching, in the hospital and other areas, and I think it's their biggest single failing of having a very unhappy workforce and also a very unhappy population.
Okay, thank you, Guy.
Well, there's potentially a massive list of huge failings. So I'm just going to go for the one that costs Jersey the most money. And that was allowing COVID-19 into the island when we should have closed the ports, the airport and the harbour, like Guernsey did. And we should have had a strict quarantine for people who wanted to come in, not a voluntary one, an unsupervised one. Whilst we were all safe distancing, wearing masks and looking at lockdown, Guernsey was continuing life as normal until, unfortunately, some months down the line, COVID got in by apparently import of deep frozen products. That, I think, well, over 100 fatalities, £300 million spent directly on COVID issues, and actually an economy that shot through and still is. That was a disaster.
Thank you. Okay, Carolyn.
Well, I would completely disagree with that answer. I think the pandemic and the way it was handled, okay, there was no guidebook to tell us and show us what to do. This was, you know, everyone was struggling to find the way forward. And then when the vaccine came, that was a reprieve where we could sort of see some light at the end of the tunnel. But I would say that, yes, we handled things differently to Guernsey. I would say that we handled it differently, but I wouldn't say the outcomes were necessarily different. I didn't actually want to talk about COVID, but Guy mentioned it there. I feel one of our failings has been with our support or lack of it to our fishermen in the past 4 years, especially with the French.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Steve.
Like Rose, when I heard the question, I started to think, where would I start? And this government has had a long number of failings over the 4 years, riddled with indecision, consultation, review, but not getting on and just doing things. And the thing for me that stands out is, in the last 4 years, we've taken on nearly an extra 1,000 civil servants, and we're now spending nearly an extra £250 million. And that's an ongoing cost. That has to be sorted out. This government have spent an awful lot more money and employed an awful lot more people when everybody around them is trying to cut their cloth to meet the amount of money they have in their pocket.
Okay, thank you. Piers.
Right. I wouldn't say it's actually a government failing, as the government actually sits in the minority in the Assembly. So I'd actually say it's an entire Assembly failing we've had over the last 4 years. particularly just coming to loggerheads and not being able to progress through with decisions. And listening to some of the states' assemblies, definitely this last year, have definitely shown that. So I think it's what I'd say is for the next states' assembly, it needs to be the whole assembly is working for the island and not looking to score political brownie points at every opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder that there are 6 candidates, of course, for Grouville and St Martin. Philip Leclerc is unable to join us this evening, so just to mention that for those of you who are just joining us now. This question next from Emma is more aimed at Grouville and St Martin. So she's asking, what provisions would you suggest to keep people with average salaries in our country parishes in the current climate where housing in our parishes is becoming unaffordable? So that's going to go first to Guy.
Well, affordable housing, what a great idea when everything's so expensive. But once again, it's fraught with what exactly do you mean? What is an affordable house? And when you pay for it for taxpayers' money, do you stick to the price that you think the affordable house should be when there's 50 people in the queue to buy it, many of them who are going to offer 50,000 more just to get hold of it? Affordable housing is a sop. It's a lure to get votes, which is why the political parties think it's a very excellent idea. The problem is too many people. Supply and demand. We don't have enough places to build homes, and we keep bringing people into the island. Over the last 4 years, 5,600 extra people approved by the Economic Development Minister.
Okay.
Well.
Thank you, Guy. Carolyn.
Thank you. There are schemes that are being developed, and they are with shared equity. I mean, first and foremost, we are going to have to build some more housing. And certainly in Grouville, we need to look for pockets of appropriate land, that can take not huge estates, but sort of 10 or so houses or something like that. And as I say, we have the shared equity schemes, which is a good thing, which makes property a lot more affordable for the first-time buyer. So that is being developed. Another scheme is being developed whereby we loan people deposit money. So instead of paying rent, they are given they are loaned the money for the deposit, so they can get onto the property ladder and then pay the mortgage.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you. Well, parishioners, old and young in St Martin's, want to stay in St Martin's if they possibly can. Families growing up want to stay in the areas where they grew up themselves. And retiring parishioners want to retire in St Martin's if they've lived there all their lives. Fortunately, in St Martin's, over the last 11 years, we've managed to build some affordable housing. I took a proposition, one of the first propositions I took to the Assembly in 2012 was to rezone a field which we now have closed, La Troque, 20 homes for affordable homes for young families to live in. And most recently in the Bridging Island plan, I managed to get a field rezoned for more retirement homes next to La Cook in St Martin. We also have another field rezoned for more affordable housing. So I'm happy that in St Martin at least, we will be able to accommodate more of our retiring parishioners, more of our young families, and I can only encourage other parishes to do the same where possible.
Thank you. Piers.
As a younger member who actually left the parish because of housing, not being able to get any within the parish, I do want to work from day one, if I got in, with the parishes to actually look at planning ahead for the next island plan, which is 2025. So we've got 3 years to actually start looking and planning and not go through the same debacle we've just had in the last island plan with the wrong field being selected for housing, but also the opportunity to look at what other facilities do we need out east. When you look at the west, it's very well catered for young families, different facilities out there. The east is lacking in those facilities, so it needs to consider not just housing, but the other facilities that we may need to include.
Thank you.
I'm in favour of using brownfield sites. I'm in favour of using derelict greenhouse sites rather than using green fields. And I know this has been spoken about before, and I think it was recently rejected again in the States. I definitely think that that's where to start rather than going into green fields. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to, housing is a very popular subject tonight, funnily enough. Dave M has said, what do the standees think about buy-to-let landlords and the fact we've got 23 landlords in the States whose vested interests, he says, collectively ended up voting down a landlord licensing scheme? So that will go first to Carolyn.
Well, we've brought forward a rent safe scheme, and the scheme that got voted down was requiring every single property to be inspected day one before it could be let out. Well, as the scheme develops, then more and more properties are going to come on stream and be inspected. So to my mind, that's a far better way of doing it, in a gradual way. As properties are developed, they come on and they're graded. And I think landlords can then advertise what grading they've got, so people that are renting can see and know the standard to expect from that property. And frankly, if they fall below a certain standard, they should be deemed unlettable.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
First, can I say that I am a landlord. I have 3 small units, 1 that rented to my father and 2 to my sons. So I know about being a landlord. I also know about being a tenant, and it's always both sides that need to be looked at together. But I am in favour of a register of landlords. But the question was about buy-to-let, and there's no doubt in my mind that that's been one of the reasons why the house prices have continued to rise in the last few years. People have had little interest in money in the bank, and they've all looked at ways of trying to make best use of it. And the demand for buy-to-let properties is something that people have been able to invest in and get a very good return on. And that one reason alone is why property prices have continued to move ahead. But buy-to-let landlords, just like any others, have to provide suitable quality product to lease to tenants.
Thank you. Piers?
I have to apologise because it's not a topic I have particularly looked into yet, but I definitely will be looking into it. I mean, as two before me have said, we need to make sure that the housing provided is suitable and of a high quality. So I will definitely look into schemes moving forward.
Okay, Rose?
Yes, I'm not convinced that buy-to-let landlords is necessarily driving up the prices of accommodation, because it's just, I would have said it's more down to demand than who actually owns the property, but I may be wrong there.
Okay, thank you. Guy?
Well, let me just explore this slightly. My first priority would be to have a closer look at those people who buy but do not let. I've had people telling me that there are scores of apartments down on the waterfront that are bought, but no one's living there. Buy-to-let clearly is a source of income for property owners. And some people, in my view, have a rather excessive number of owned and rented properties. I don't think it's something that you can or indeed should attempt to overturn overnight, because people have been allowed to do this for time immemorial. But I think you start with A, why are you not letting, and B, putting a limit, for example, on how many properties you can own.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just a reminder that we have a candidate missing this evening. It's Philip Leclerc, who isn't able to join us this evening. And I am trying to prioritise the Grouville and St Martin questions. So this one, which will go to Steve first, is from Jane. Says, sorry, that's the wrong one, from Jill and Wendy. It says, what issues do you think unite the two parishes, and which issues do you think divide them?
Well, issues that divide them, I guess, is around any two parishes on the island that are neighbours. We have inter-Vantane rivalry, we have inter-parish rivalry, we have inter-island rivalry. So there's always sporting rivalry between the parishes. Obviously, something that unites us is the Royal Bay of Grouville, where at one end we have Grouville, at the other end we have St Martin. We share boundaries, we share Glory Village. Disappointingly, Grouville haven't Whistle's Fish and Chip Shop. It would be nice if the parish boundary was maybe a few hundred yards further southwest, and that would be much more benefit to St Martin's Parishes. No, but to be serious, we are good neighbours to each other. We share a boundary, but I don't think there's too much rivalry between the two parishes.
Thank you. Piers?
Apart from friendly rivalry, I don't think there's any big divides. As for what makes them unique, well, the rural environment, and it's one of the key bits that we need to protect within the parish, and that's why planning and looking forward to planning is so important, to make sure that we can protect the wonderful green rural environment. It is the green side of the island, and it is so photogenic. Everyone recognises it, and yeah, the side is fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Rose.
Yes, I agree. The two parishes are lovely. I think they share Gory, and I don't think there's too much rivalry between the two. I don't think they've got anything to be jealous of one another of.
Guy?
Well, I think the two parishes should get together and have a good long look at the future, and the future is going to be jolly interesting. First, we've got the proximity to France. Second, we've got the fascinating and increasingly difficult row with French fishermen and attempting to look after our own fishermen. Then, way before we get to rising sea levels, we're going to get some pretty tricky weather. So there, St Martin has some advantage because it's further above sea level than a lot of Grouville is. In fact, some of Grouville is below sea level. So we're going to have to start looking at future issues, and that's where I think that the two parishes will work together. And interestingly, we may even have to have the same heraldic shield, because they're almost the same now.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Carolyn?
I don't think there's, as the other candidates have said, I don't believe there's an awful lot that divides us other than our uniqueness, which is a good thing, our heritage, and having just, well, not completed, it's ongoing, the Island Identity project. I think it's a wonderful thing, the differences, but I think we share Gory. We share Gory fate. It's put on by the two parishes. And if there is rivalry, it's all friendly.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is kind of on a similar note from Aidan. He's saying, if elected, will you actively pursue the reinstatement of the Jersey electorate's right to vote for candidates with an island-wide mandate? That's obviously the things done. So goes first to Piers.
Although I'm not familiar enough to try and bring a proposition forward myself, I definitely would be supportive of a proposition to reinstate island-wide mandate in some shape or form. Whether it's complete island-wide or partial island-wide, it would depend on what's brought forward.
Okay, Rose?
Yes, I definitely support bringing back senators. I'm very unhappy with the way that the new voting districts have been sorted out. I think it destroys the parish system. I don't feel that, how can you be a deputy for 2 or 3 different parishes correctly? I just don't think it's the way that it promotes the community spirit in each parish. So I definitely bring them back.
Okay, Guy?
I've been a campaigner for the island-wide vote since before I came back to Jersey, and certainly whilst I was in the States, and since then. In fact, some of my ideas were picked up by Guernsey, and one of them featured as one of the 5 choices in the Guernsey referendum what they were going to do. I've got a number of formulae to get island-wide back. It is the fairest system. There's no issue about boundaries. It's the whole island. Every voter gets the same choice of candidates, and every voter can exercise the same number of votes. There is no fairer system, and in a small island like Jersey, we should bring it back for all candidates.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I'm most certainly a supporter. In fact, I took a proposition to the States when PPC decided in their wisdom about 10 years ago to lob off 4 senatorial seats. That I think it was a tied vote, so it fell. So I'm most certainly a supporter. I think the new system is absolutely appalling. I'll go along with it. I'm quite happy to go along with it for the time being, but the fact of the matter is, residents of Grouville and St Martin have had their 10 votes reduced to 4. Well, and those 6 that they've lost have gone to the non-voting people in the urban parishes. It's just ridiculous. So absolutely, and I'm quite happy to bring it forward.
Thank you, Steve.
Complicated subject. We could be here hours talking about this. We've had a number of debates about it, but one thing we did need to do was to try to resolve the issue of voter equity so that everybody on the island had a more equal vote. And if we hadn't taken a decision, we almost certainly may well have had it imposed upon us, which is something we didn't really want to do. I'm no great fan of this new system either. But I always said that if the parishes are to be represented in the States, that it's the constable that should be representing and not the deputy. And I said I would vote to do myself out of a seat as long as my constable stayed in the States, which is what I did. But I too agree with the others. The only really true fair way of doing it equally is to have island-wide representation. Everybody I speak to wants the senators back. I'm sure in the new assembly we will have a proposition very shortly after the states get back, whoever gets back.
Okay, thank you very much. And just a reminder, you can still put your questions in. We're still taking questions. I'm trying to get around to all of them and to get them from different people, so I'm not asking the same person's questions all the time. And this is a slightly different topic. Rose, this will go first to you. From Dennis, how would you vote on the question of assisted dying? He says, trust is fundamental to the relationships between patients and medical professionals. How do you think such legislation would alter this relationship?
I'm very much in favour of assisted dying. I don't see why it should have to alter the relationship. I don't think any doctor should be forced to participate in assisted dying if they don't want to. But I definitely think that we should allow it because it's people are in extreme pain. I don't think it's fair for us to not allow them to end their own lives in the way that they want to. I accept there needs to be safeguards. I understand that fully, but I'm fully supportive of it.
Thank you, Guy.
Well, I think in a sense, we have assisted dying already. It's just that we call it palliative care. But you are certainly helped out of this life in the least painful way possible. The interesting thing to me, and probably the greatest value of having assisted dying, is that the person who's dying decides when they want to die. And I think in terms of the person most directly involved, that's pretty important. So we should be looking to see how this can be facilitated in a proper way.
Carolyn.
Subject to huge amounts of safeguards in place, especially for the vulnerable. Subject to that, I think I would be supportive of assisted dying. At the moment, we don't have it. So those that choose how to end their own lives and wish to go to Dignitas or a clinic like that in Switzerland, I mean, at the moment, the way things stand, they have to get on a plane, usually with a loved one, to go over to Switzerland or and be there, and without being in their home, surrounded by their family. I think it would be far better if we were to acknowledge things and have the facility here.
Thank you. Steve.
Yes, I completely agree. And when we had the States debate not very long ago now, I voted very much in favour of moving forward with assisted dying. as has already been said, we have to have a huge number of safeguards in place. There's more work to do. It's disappointing that we haven't managed to move faster, because knowing how much work there is still to do, we could have moved much quicker in the last 4 years, but there's been too much resistance at the top, which is, as I say, disappointing. It's a very emotive issue, one that comes close to my heart and many others, but I know that the vast majority of the general public are in favour of this, and the quicker we can get on and get this work done, the better.
Thank you. Piers?
I'm going to sound like a broken record, following with the other two. Again, it's about safeguarding. I have no problem supporting it as long as the suitable safeguarding is in place to protect those that need it.
Thank you. Right, we're going to move on now to Nathan's question, which gets off that topic, which is the impact of Brexit on Jersey's economy are yet to be, or the impacts, I should say, of Brexit on Jersey's economy are yet to be fully felt. What do candidates propose around investing in relations with the EU and France with a view to improving on the existing trade deal, possibly giving us more beneficial terms than the UK have negotiated? So that will go first to Guy.
Well, if we haven't learned from hundreds of years of history, then let me just remind you of one salient feature. The French can't be trusted. They're either invading us, stealing our fish, raiding, whatever. And the idea that we, for some reason, want to get back with the EU, I'm sorry. Brexit was a very good idea. Why? Because completely irrespective of all the economic issues, the border issues, the UK took its sovereignty back from giving it away to a bunch of EU civil servants and bureaucrats. And Jersey's always been on that path. We regard our sovereignty as probably the most important thing that this island has. We should hang on to it, and the idea we want to trade it with the French or the EU,
Okay.
non-starter.
Thank you, Guy. Carolyn?
Well, we didn't make the decision, but we've got to get on with it. It got decided for us. I would favour ploughing our own furrow a lot more than what we are doing at the minute. I think, I mentioned the fishermen before, I think the way that Brexit has worked out for them has been really bad, and I would like to see some negotiations with the French to possibly renegotiate a new revised Bay of Grouville treaty. I know many fishermen wanted to just put it in the bin and couldn't wait to rip it up. However, if I think we're all feeling the effects, them as well as us. So that would be the starter, but I don't believe we have felt the full effects of Brexit now, and I don't know what it's going to do to the level of our population and other things. So I think we've got to wait and see.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
I think we all had a shock when we woke up on the morning that Brexit was announced, and we didn't quite realise the implications for our island. We knew that we hadn't voted in the vote in the UK to leave, and my immediate reaction was one of immense disappointment as somebody who's worked in France, traded with France, spent much time in France, moving backwards and forwards from France, recreational as well as business. I knew that life was never going to be the same again, and in many ways it hasn't been. France are our closest neighbours. We were part of Normandy for many, many centuries. We're now part of the UK, Great Britain, sorry. We're now part of Great Britain, and they're our trading partners. It's not easy. It's not going to get any easier, I fear. I'm really disappointed that the way it's turned out, but we must start up some direct dialogue with our neighbours in Normandy and Brittany and see how we can resolve the issues together.
Thank you. Piers?
Well, Brexit's just the gift that keeps on giving. But I've always found it odd that we don't have as many trade routes going directly across to France, given how close a neighbour they are. So although I don't know full details of the trade agreements and what we can and cannot do, I would always be supportive of where we can look at opportunities to actually have new trade routes going straight through to Europe rather than having to go via the UK.
Okay, thank you, Rose.
I'm utterly opposed to Brexit because it's been an economic disaster. I think it's playing havoc with Northern Ireland, and actually I can see it breaking up the entire United Kingdom. It's financially disastrous. I think we should have stayed in the customs union and the single market. I would be very much in favour of closer allies with France. As Stephen had said, we are basically a Norman island, and I think that we ought to treasure our past relationship with them. And I think I would be very much in favour of seeing if we could get some sort of Northern Ireland agreement where we could sort of trade with Europe and with the UK. It seems to be working for them, so I don't know why it can't work for us.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're around about halfway through now. So just a reminder that we've got one candidate missing this evening. Of course, that's Philip Leclerc, who is also standing for the parishes of Grouville and St Martin.
Can we have a name check for the people who are here?
Yes.
Philip Leclerc is getting a name check every 3 minutes.
Well, I'm name checking every time I ask you, but yes, you can say your name if you want to. So obviously, if you want to say Rose Binet, Guy Defay, Carolyn Labby, Steve Luce and Piers Songon, but I think everybody's getting your name every time you answer a question. So Tom Ellis, who I'm giving a name check to, has asked a question. How do we reduce the cost of GP appointments for people, given the government has shown no commitment to this in the last 10 years, as the rebate has remained the same despite costs increasing for surgery, says Tom Ellis, and that's going to go first to Carolyn.
Well, we've just given £9 million to doctors' surgeries so they can develop their surgeries and offer extended care. So they can employ nurses, they can employ paramedics, they can employ community workers from the surgery. So if you go to the doctors, if it's a routine sort of blood test or something like that, there's no reason why that can't be carried out by a nurse. So in theory, the price should, the doctor's fees or the surgery fees should come down. So it should give you some options of who to go to. But yes, you're right. It hasn't been increased. I think the cost of a doctor now is £70, and the state offer 20 towards that.
The questioner is absolutely right. It's over a decade now since we put any more money into doctors. And so what's happened is that the members of the general public are having to pay more and more and more. While the health insurance fund is raided and money from it used for employing consultants and doing reviews, something that wasn't envisaged for at all. So the first thing that needs to be done is more money needs to be put into doctors, because people with young families, people with children who need regular doctor's appointments are all finding it excruciatingly expensive to go to a doctor. And it's fine putting money in now, but we should have been doing it for the last 12 years. So that's one of the first things that needs to happen, is more money for doctors, reduce the cost of the fee to go and see your doctor. More doctors on the island, because they can make a bit more availability and less waiting times. Something we haven't seen in Jersey before. We're now having to not only pay a lot of money, but we're having to wait a long time.
Thank you. Okay, Piers?
I don't think I can add much more to what Steve has just said. He's covered all of it. Really, we do need, I've already mentioned this before, the long-term care, is we need to make sure that the money can actually follow behind and actually support the industry. For the doctors, if the nurses are coming in, they need to make sure they can get a viable wage. And if the government isn't helping top it up, it's going to have to come from the public. So the government needs to find the money to put in there to help all round, really. It's not just providing the care to the patients going in, but also to ensure that the career, the sector can be seen as a viable career for those wanting to go into it.
Thank you, Rose.
Yes, I agree with what Stephen said to say. He pretty much summed up how I feel about it, that it's the doctors have not been supported properly over the last 10 years, and they definitely need to have more funding, and for the lower earners that they should be given benefits, not to have to pay for the doctor, those on low incomes. That's all.
Okay, Guy?
Well, let's have a look at it, shall we? £40 to £50 for a 10-minute chat at your GP surgery, perhaps a blood check and so on. £70 to £80 to have someone come out to your home, and over £100, of course, if it's the weekend. This is all very well, and the government, as usual, is going to throw more money at the exercise and hope it'll improve things. I doubt it will bring the prices down. But the entire approach is wrong. And what we should be doing in Jersey is something called preventative medicine, which is getting people early, heading them off at the pass before they get really ill. All we do at the moment is wait until they get ill or they've damaged themselves in some way. In other words, we do reactive medicine, and we should be doing something way in advance of that, and it works out fantastically cheaper.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stay with health now, because Anna from St Martin has asked a question about the ambulance service. She says, how will the understaffing of the Frontline ambulance service be tackled? Currently, the ambulance service is running under appropriate levels due to sickness, maternity, and not backfilling staff as they've left. Skill sets are now being eroded, and there's a pilot being considered to use lesser qualified staff to drive the paramedics around. Bearing in mind there's only 3 ambulances available in the day, says Anna, and 2 at night. This is not gold standard care for the island of Jersey. So what do we think about that, Steve?
Well, Anna's quite right, and I know that at numerous occasions firemen are now asked to drive ambulances because we don't have enough staff at the ambulance service. She's quite right also that we don't have enough paramedics at times, and she's quite, again, she seems to know all the facts. People are leaving, people are not coming back here. We have a desperate shortage of key worker accommodation. And that's one thing that we've really got to tackle very quickly. How we expect our nurses, our paramedics, our teachers, those that provide the real essential services to come over and work for us here on the island, where the level of accommodation we seek to provide them is completely inadequate, is beyond me. We have, at the same time, buildings like Westaway Court, where the nurses used to live, completely empty. I can't remember how long it's been empty now, for 7 years, maybe. It's a disgrace. We desperately need proper key worker accommodation to attract these key workers to the island.
Thank you. Yes.
As Steve says, I'm very aware that the fire service personnel, both from the airport and from the fire service itself, have actually been drafted in to help drive the ambulances. But it's not just the ambulance service, it's the whole health sector are having the same issue. And as much as there's a point about providing housing for key workers when they first arrive, we also want to retain the key workers, and they go on to have families, and there needs to be better support for our key workers when they have that family, to encourage them to return to work, and it can still work in a family life. I know a lot of nursing staff have left the hospital and other parts of the healthcare sector as soon as they've had children, because it doesn't fit with the lifestyle of actually raising a family, and that's something that needs to be addressed as a good employer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Stephen summed it up again exactly. It's they're not providing the right accommodation. Are we providing the right remuneration? There must be some reasons that people are not staying in the service. I think they're very unhappy. I don't think they're actually enjoying the way that they're being managed. I've heard that from a lot of people, that people are extremely unhappy. And that runs through everything, really. It's not just on the ambulance service. And also, I think we need to be looking to training younger people into these skills. But, we're not really offering enough training to train up paramedics and ambulance drivers and nurses. We're just hoping that people are going to come here and want to stay here. And it's not easy to live here.
Okay.
Well, a potential solution is pay ambulance drivers more money, pay paramedics more money. But all we do is we get into ever-increasing costs for health, wage spiral going up. And of course, this is a small problem that's part of the massive problem. which is too many people in a small island. Now, I don't know how many of the people listening have bothered to work out how many too many people is, but about in the mid-90s, it was suggested that the sustainable population for Jersey was 80,000. Well, you don't need even a fag back to work out that we're 20,000 people more than sustainable. And that's the basic problem. 1 in 5 of the people that you walk past in the street, we could do without.
Okay, thank you, Guy. I don't know how we're going to choose who we do that, but we'll
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
Oh,
There's 6 of us here then. Right, so I'm going to, next question, it covers...
I didn't understand.
Oh, sorry, Carolyn, I'm so sorry. I do apologise.
That's okay. I don't think I'm going to say anything new other than I would like to find out why people aren't coming forward for those positions. I'd like to understand the reason behind. If it is, and I understand we've got to provide key worker accommodation, I understand that perfectly well. And there are plans afoot. Steve said Westaway Chambers has been empty for 8 years. Well, I know the housing minister has got plans drawn up through Andium to turn that into key worker accommodation. And there's a commitment to provide 25 new homes per annum for key worker accommodation. I'm a bit surprised to hear peers say that about the working conditions, the hours for getting young families back, because post-COVID, I was really hoping, post-lockdown, I was really hoping that a more flexible working approach is adopted throughout the employment sector.
Thank you very much. Right, so this question, we've touched on some of the kind of topics in this next question from Lee Davis. He starts off saying, last year, Numbeo labelled Jersey as the most expensive place to live out of a list of 139 countries. This is based on the average price of goods and services, giving a cost of living of 117.11% higher than the UK. How would the candidates address this label and all the problems it now gives the island, like homelessness, outside job seekers we have touched on, refusing to relocate, and the increased use of food banks by locals? So that we're going to start with.
It's me, isn't it? One wonderful one. It's not right. In an island as affluent as we are, people shouldn't be having to go to food banks, particularly when so much food is still thrown away on a daily basis because supermarkets won't take it. That it just shouldn't be the case. As for some products coming to the island, we are very restricted. A lot of our food comes in from off island, so we are stuck on the trade price that they come in at. But I would hope that there's ways that we could explore what we can actually produce on island and see if we can actually help reduce the cost of that from locally produced products.
Okay, thank you, Rose.
I think it's exceptionally difficult to have a solution to the high cost of living in this island. I think mostly it's driven by cost of housing. Yes, importing our food can be seen as expensive, but actually growing it locally is not that cheap. You have to import fertilizer, the staff that you need to work in the fields. A lot of people don't want to come and work here any longer, and then you've got to house them. So it's a bit of a, you're going round in a circle, and I think it's going to take some people to sit down and spend some time on actually trying to sort the problem out. It's not an easy, there's no easy solution to it.
Guy?
Well, these international comparisons are always quite interesting, but the fact of the matter is we live on an island, and living on any island, wherever it is invariably going to be more expensive than living on a large land base. So I really have to go back to the central issue. The problem in Jersey is we have too many people. For people as old as me, we used to talk about trying to get a cork into a pint pot. I realise that younger folk won't have a clue what I've just said, but it's basically trying to get a litre into a half-litre mug. And until we address that issue, and currently we're still adding people at roughly 700 work permits worth a year, we're not going to make any progress.
Thank you, Carolyn.
I think food prices are probably going to go up in these coming months with the food shortages, with what's happening in Ukraine. I've always felt it totally immoral to charge tax, to charge GST on food. In my own manifesto, I'm saying I'm asking that we consider locally grown food, not taxing locally grown food for the local markets, because I believe that will be a start, but I'd quite happily support GST to come off food. We are a successful island. We've got a finite amount of space. Everything's a balance, and it happens that, you know, we are expensive. All those factors together means that we are an expensive island. But I think government needs to do what it can to alleviate things for people that are struggling.
Thank you, Steve.
Well, I think it was Guy that said we're a small island and we suffer from small island economies, and he's absolutely right on that one. He's completely wrong on population, because how we take 104,000 people back to 80,000, we might ask him where the 24,000 who is going to choose the ones that leave. Anyway, let's get serious about this. Unfortunately, food banks are a part of society at the moment. I wish they weren't. But I think, as Carolyn says, that food prices are going to continue to increase. That's unfortunate, but a fact of life with Ukraine, with the cost of everything, the cost of food production. Rose is right, producing food, we can grow anything we like in Jersey. What we can't do is grow it competitively against England, against Europe, against Eastern Europe. I wish that we didn't have food banks, but one thing we could do is to change the legislation to make it much easier for food to get to food banks and then to get to those that need it. So that's one thing that we could be positive. Unfortunately, the gap between rich and poor is as big as it's ever going to be, and we've got to address that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to change the subject slightly now. A question here from Charles. He said that the Chief Minister and the former Chief Executive undertook an expensive restructuring of government. Well, it's probably not just the Chief Minister, but it's the former Chief Executive undertook an expensive restructuring of government. One Gov seems to have led to just more civil servants, says Charles, without any improvement in the frontline services. Is this right? Do you think further reforms are needed?
I think it's been a complete disaster, and I definitely think we need to reform what we have got at the moment. To me, there is no proper lines of accountability. The sort of run from, we've got no particular minister that's in charge of a department. All the departments seem to be merged together. No one seems to know who's in charge. It's an absolute mess, and we should get back to trying to sort out clear lines of administration accountability with a political minister at the top of each section, each department.
Go ahead.
I think the Chief Minister was pretty lax in supervising this, but the prime suspect is clearly Mr. Charles Parker, the former Chief Executive, who, if you remember, arrived with his 4 angel chums, and before we knew what was going on, we had well over 100 appointments to senior positions in local government shipped over from the United Kingdom. I've called it a bloodless coup. And for all we know, Mr. Parker may still be running the island, sending emails out in the morning, occasionally getting people on the mobile phone. He hasn't got a lot else to do, and he's got £500,000 to keep him ticking over when he should have been sacked. The whole thing's been a complete shambles, and it will take an awful long time, unfortunately, to sort it all out.
Okay, Carolyn.
I would agree the Charlie Parker era has been a disaster. I mean, it wasn't this government that employed him, I have to say, but the restructuring that took place with the One Gov, as Rose says, the lines of accountability were a mess. Ministers recognised that. I'm glad to say that John Young brought forward a proposition in the last state sitting, which reversed the powers of the chief executive. And it will be down to the new government to restructure the ministers in charge of their own departments again, which to my mind is what's needed. And in fact, I would like to see assistant ministers accountable to different things so that the people, the punters, know exactly who to go to and exactly who's responsible and accountable.
Thank you, Steve.
The way our system has always worked in Jersey is that politicians make decisions and civil servants enact them. And over the last 4 years, that has disappeared completely, I'm afraid. By now, OneGov was supposed to have started, in fact, at the end of last year, OneGov was supposed to start delivering savings. All we've had in the last 4 years, as I said earlier, is nearly £250 million extra cost and nearly 1,000 extra civil servants. So it's clearly been a complete failure. I can't stress enough how important it's going to be to, as Rose says, we need political accountability. Politicians get elected to do jobs. They should make decisions, and those decisions need to be enacted by civil servants. And until we can get back to the days of ministers with chief officers and departments that are responsible, we're going to really flounder. We've had some departments with no ministers in charge, other departments with 3 or 4 ministers in charge. Nobody knows what's happening. We need to get back to where we were 5 years ago.
Thank you. Piers.
Everyone's already said everything. It has been disastrous. I know some departments where they've basically been in stalemate for 2-3 years, waiting for whatever the restructuring is, not wanting to start big projects because they don't know who's still going to be there, who's being shifted around. And then on top of that, the ministers don't know who's actually got accountability. I'm aware that a couple of years ago, we did phone up one minister. And he said, "Why are you phoning me?" And it said, "Well, on the website, it says you're in charge." And they didn't know. So even the ministers didn't know where they've got stuff on that system. So yeah, come the next assembly, I hope that a new ministerial system can be put in where there's direct responsibility. And I completely agree with Karen, actually, that some of the assistant ministers can definitely help having responsibility as well.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, this is a short but sweet question from Sam, who wants to know, what would your priority be for improving education? So that's going to go first to Guy.
Well, I'd like to see, actually, although I doubt it will happen, a baccalaureate style approach. In other words, you get some basic, everybody has to have a key set of basics. Your language, another language, maths, science, so on. It's the baccalaureate approach, of course, is a French one, and once you go past that, then you diverge. I'm not really the person to discuss this in any way. My own personal education was a complete disaster. I was an August birth. I arrived as the youngest guy in the year. Then I went into a fast stream. I overtook people. I ended up doing O-levels age 13 or 14, and I just needed to slow down after a while. I fortunately survived it.
Thank you.
It's survivable.
You survived it, but the time's run out, I'm afraid. Carolyn.
If we were allowed to take a philosophical approach, I would say that children now are subject to too many exams. I don't know how you measure their achievements, the standards that they get, but I just see children being put under so much pressure at school. And I feel incredibly sorry for them. So if there was, if somebody could take a blank piece of paper and redesign the education system, I would like to see that addressed. I mean, this government have put in £11 million into education this last time because there hadn't been enough investment, and there isn't enough investment. So hopefully that will improve things, but I would like to see the whole thing. But it would have to happen everywhere. It can't just happen here.
Yeah. Steve?
Over the last 10 years, I've changed a bit of emphasis. I used to think that the economy was everything, but now I realise that economy is nothing without people to work in it, and we need people to work across all sectors of the economy. Our children need to be educated in all sectors of the economy. They need to have vocations as well. Teachers are being asked to do too much. The curriculum is completely overloaded, and the rules and regulations around administration paperwork mean that many of our teachers spend less time teaching and a lot more time organising and shuffling pieces of paper. That needs to change. For me, we need a Jersey curriculum, one that prepares our children for life and prepares them for work after school. We need to make life easier for teachers so they can do what they train to do, which is teach. That needs money. We need to build more schools. Our class sizes are becoming too high, and we need to address all those issues really quickly so we've got a proper workforce for the future.
Thank you. Piers?
So one of my focuses I want to look at is actually further and higher education, so the upper end of our education, because education is for life. Every day is a new learning day. And I think it's really important. Jersey's got some fantastic courses, both for higher education and further education on Ireland, but they're not always well advertised, and a lot of Islanders don't realise they're here. On top of that, facilities that are available are not really fit for purpose, and I think we really need to develop in facilities. I'm not saying university, unlike some of the others, but we definitely do need the facilities to be developed in the island. I'm a big fan of it for higher education, particularly because then we can actually get students doing research, which then takes more back and less pressure on needing consultants coming into the island, because we can develop our own on-island information.
Thank you. Rose?
I think for an island that is quite a rich island, we don't seem to have particularly good results coming out of our schools. I think that teachers have got far too much paperwork to do. They're not spending enough time teaching. I also agree that their children are over-tested, too many exams. But I'm particularly interested in disadvantaged children and younger children, because I think if you can help them at the very beginning, then it will eventually be better in the long run, because I think we need to invest more in those areas, because some disadvantaged children can disrupt classes, and we need to look, and they're much too big, the classes, and we need to look at exactly how our money is spent in education. Is it being spent in the right places?
Okay, thank you. Next question is from John Davis, and he's saying that based on those who have declared they will run for Chief Minister, and of course there may be others who will declare that they're going to run, those are Christina Moore, Philip Balash and Mark Boliat. Who will you support if elected? Carolyn, you're first on this one.
I would have to hear what they would propose, what they are proposing for the new government, what they hope to achieve. I'd have to hear more from them. I know the ones that declared that they want to be Chief Minister, but I need to hear why.
Okay,
It's a very simple answer for me. I'm a member of the Progress Party. We've reached a coalition with the Jersey Liberal Conservatives. So you've written a joint manifesto. It's available for everybody to look at. And we've decided between us that Sir Philip Balash will be our nomination for Chief Minister. So if any of us are fortunate enough to be elected, and Sir Philip is elected, he will be our nomination for that post.
Okay, Piers.
I will reserve comment till the dust settles after June 22nd.
I would agree with Carolyn. I'd like to know exactly what people are offering. What are they suggesting that they're going to do for the island? Who would they put in as their ministers? What would be their vision?
And Guy.
Well, I feel very strongly that no leader of a political party should end up as Chief Minister, because I think that will be utterly divisive in the Assembly. So neither of the Knights of the Realm would get my vote. I like Christina Moore. I think she's done good work in the past, but if I'm not mistaken, she's basically been on scrutiny side. and I'm not sure about her ministerial experience. So suddenly going from scrutiny to chief minister, doubtful. I think none of the above at the moment.
Okay. I think she was a.
She was a minister.
Yeah.
I apologise, Christina, if you're listening.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to not talk about politics for a second. We're going to talk about the environment. So Wayne Lequiro has asked, what innovative changes would you introduce to meet our carbon neutral target, Steve?
Well, there's a good question. Carbon neutral targets. We need to find innovative ways to use less carbon in transport and less carbon in housing. So we need to think of schemes to get more people out of their cars. And for me, one of those is providing even more buses and providing them even cheaper than they are now. Our bus service has improved dramatically over the last decade or so. But we need more buses, and we need to make it really cheap to reduce the use of cars. We need to help people to insulate their homes more. We need to provide more money to take out oil-fired boilers and put in electrical systems. We need to create more sustainable energy. We need to allow farmers to grow crops which keep our carbon emissions in soil, sequester carbon. We need to find ways to use the marine environment to help with that as well. So there's lots to do, lots of challenges. Sustainable energy can be one way out of it.
Thank you.
Yes, so there are a lot of options, and there's basically a two-pronged approach where you can go for reducing our emissions that we're putting out, but also working on actually how to capture more emissions out of the atmosphere. I think Jersey's in a fantastic place where we can work on both. We need to be more innovative in our construction and including green infrastructure into our developments, which we don't do enough of at the moment. And we do need to improve our public transport to reduce the number of cars that are on the road at any given time. But we also need to improve the habitats such as our wetlands and the blue carbon potential as well around the island, which can draw down an immense amount of carbon back into the soil. So there's a variety of ways that we can tackle that.
Thank you, Rose.
Yes, I think that we have to be able to use grow crops that absorb carbon. I think we could actually plant more trees, and I also think that perhaps we could look at putting a higher tax on the cars that use the most fuel, and possibly taxing boat fuel, which is not currently taxed.
Okay.
Well, I do have to say, first of all, I'll be completely blunt about this, I think we're obsessed with carbon, and there are many more serious environmental issues in Jersey and around the planet. My real worry at the moment is microplastics, which appear to be absolutely everywhere. Tops of mountains, Arctic, Antarctic, below the ocean and underneath it. And in babies now being born. I'm concerned about rainforests being cut down, burnt down, left, right and centre across the planet. That's a big difference to carbon issues. Locally, seagrass is a really good carbon sink. What are we doing about that? Most people don't even know where it is. And of course, Rose is quite right. We need to grow more trees.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. And oh, sorry, Carol, I do keep doing this to you, don't I? I do apologise.
Take it personally.
Please don't take it personally.
Yeah, well, the seagrass is a fantastic form of absorbing carbon. So I think we really need to look at that. And you know, we're surrounded by sea. We've now passed the marine spatial plan, so it means we can actually do stuff in our own waters, manage our own waters, and that would be fantastic. People will know that I've been fighting for more cycle lanes for forever, it seems, which haven't been progressing nearly fast enough. You know, safe routes for pedestrians. I also brought forward a proposition to the states whereby to highlight our Jersey electricity laws, which were last written in 1933. So they're being updated now, so we can actually include renewable energy in our policies now.
Thank you very much, and I will try not to forget you again next time, I promise. Now, Simon has asked a question. He wants to, he says, get away from all the gloom. Can the wannabe deputies, he says, please give us 3 great things to say about Jersey, be all positive, and also advise what they would do as a priority over the next 12 months if they are successfully elected.
3 great things about Jersey. That's a wonderful place to grow up in. It's a wonderful place to raise a family in. And as someone who does environmental research as well, it's a fantastic lab for doing environmental research on the island. There's so many opportunities. What I really want to focus on, it's one of the key things I want to do, is if elected, I really want to sit down and actually start planning ahead now for the island plan for 2025 to make sure we don't end up in a mad rush like we did happened in the Bridging Island plan.
Okay, Rose?
I think the beaches are beautiful and the coast, and I think the countryside is beautiful. And I think it's a lovely place to be born and to live in. I think we're very lucky to be here. What I would like to prioritise is putting the health service back to a usable service where we've got doctors and nurses sufficient and ambulance drivers, and that people are finding it the healthcare sector a happy place to work.
Guy?
Well, 3 great things about Jersey. St Juan's Bay, where there's a good swell and some excellent surf. Low tide fishing around Seymour, Eco Tower, and actually going to look at those places. They're fascinating. And looking at fortifications. All the fortifications around the island are absolutely fascinating. I mean, we've got the full works here. You can even go and check out dolmens, 5,000 years old. In terms of, well, I've got so many things I want to do. It's very difficult to prioritise. I really want to help our local fishermen. I think our farming, well, let me put it this way, farming and fishing, our traditional industries, have been overlooked far too long. We've been looking at how to diversify from financial services for years. Well, there's 2 straightforward options. I could go on, but I haven't got any more time.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Well, I could choose the beaches, the countryside, but I would also say the community and the volunteers that work in it, because one thing that we have over here is a huge amount of volunteers. I think there's 11,000 people that offer their time in some way or other to help our community tick. So I think that is absolutely fantastic. I, in this last term, have, as I said, been doing the Island Identity Project. It is now being taught in the schools, and we've provided a resource. And I think it's really important that our school children and newcomers to the island are actually taught about the island so they can get a sense of belonging, that they actually belong here. So it's a more inclusive way of achieving people to make them feel welcome and fit in. Thank you.
Steve?
Only 3 is a very difficult question, so I'll pick out 3 really quickly. The first one's already been identified, the environment. We have an island, 45 square miles. If you go the southeast corner with the shallows and be able to walk out miles at low tide on the northwest corner, we have cliffs, we have every type of marine environment. It's fantastic. I want to pick out, secondly, the security and safety of the island. We are so honoured in Jersey to feel so safe in our homes and live in the environment we do. We need to remember that every day. And the last one that's good about Jersey is the Jersey cow. It has promoted our island around the globe and still to this day is doing great things for people in Africa who are far, far less advantaged than we are. What would I do in the next 12 months? do my very best to try to address the problems with cost of living. We have got some serious problems coming down the line in the next 12 months when it costs the costs of food, heating, and we've got to help those on the island that need financial assistance.
Thank you very much. And I guess this next question kind of relates to that, but we're talking specifically, what Julian Cousins has asked about young people. He said, what would you do to stop young people from giving up on Jersey and leaving for other cheaper or easier places to live and to raise a family? And that will go first to Rose.
Well, once again, it comes back to housing, doesn't it? And unless we can solve the housing crisis, we'll be able to offer more affordable homes. It's going to be very difficult to keep people in the island. I know a lot of people are leaving already, so it's something that we need to invest more money in, I think, to try and keep the younger people here.
Okay, Guy?
Well, sorry to diverge, but I would encourage all young people to get off the rock. There's a huge world out there, and I'm lucky enough to at one time travel all the way around it, and it's an eye-opener. Just traveling is an eye-opener when you find out that the atlas you had at school was the wrong shape. Actually, it's much longer than you think to get down to South America or Cape Town in South Africa. I don't understand, I'm afraid, the mentality of people who think that young people should simply grow up with their boundaries being the horizon at St one way and looking at France at the other end of the island. No, get out there, learn about life and come back with some interesting experiences.
Okay, Carolyn?
But that's the crux. We want them to come back. I've got two sons who live in London. They pay rent similar to what they pay here. The opportunities are probably better, and certainly the nightlife is much better. So they're quite happy there for the time being. But to encourage them back, which hopefully they will think about coming back one day, maybe to raise a family. I would say, like Rose, is the issue is housing, and we have got to address that. We are giving shared equity, as I said before, which will help people be able to get on the property ladder, and instead of paying the extortionate amount of rents, they'll pay an extortionate amount of mortgage, but at least it's their own home.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, we've got to encourage all our young islanders to get off the island for a few years, and if they possibly can get to university, they should do that. Maybe we should help employers to sponsor them at university, and we should help those employers to encourage those people they've sponsored back to the island with some tax breaks, so our kids go away, learn some experiences off the island, and then come back and work and use that to the benefit of everybody here. But then once they come back, we need to help them as young families through their really expensive childcare costs in the years up to children going to primary school. We need to help them with buying their homes, because that's one of the main reasons, as people have said, why they're leaving. So we need more affordable. I know people are criticising affordable. Let's define it. What's an average wage, and what can people on an average wage afford? That is affordable. If that only buys you half a house, well, that's fine. We'll have that shared equity schemes. We'll move forward, but let's keep our Jersey people back in Jersey and helping the economy.
Thank you.
What's been mentioned, the hardest bit is actually getting people coming back to the island after they're leaving because of the cost differences. I've had a lot of friends who have now left and they've all moved up to Scotland. Apparently that's the place to go now. But it is a case of housing, because it's much cheaper up there, much bigger properties you can get for your money, easier, much more opportunities as well. And so it's not just about building properties in Jersey, it's making sure the right properties are available. You want to raise a family, a 2-bed flat. It's not what people are after. They want space to move around. Kids can have a garden space or outdoor space of some description. So it's not just a case about building upwards and building small flats. They need to be the right properties if we're going to build them to attract the younger generation back.
Okay, thank you. And I will just remind people that we are 6 candidates for the Grouville and St Martin area, but Philip Leclerc isn't with us tonight, just so in case anybody's joined us and was wondering. I'm going to stay with this kind of idea of not being able to afford to live in Jersey, because Charles has asked, would you support a cut in fuel duty to help during the cost of living crisis, or what other measures do you think we need? And that goes to Guy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't support cut in fuel duty. I think we have to take these things on the nose. And if you're finding it's too expensive running a car, well, there are other modes of transport available, said the former operator of the bus company. It's a tempting option, but we're going to have to do something about fuel in any event, because fuel is how we get tax in to help maintain the roads and so on. But as we move over to electric, that tax level of income is going to fall. So we don't want to start cutting it straight away. What we do need to do is find a way of how we're going to tax all electric vehicles. And I think that's going to be difficult, controversial. It's got to be done.
Okay, Carolyn.
It wouldn't be my first port of call to try and lower the cost of living. No journeys in Jersey are far. So, and as Guy has said, there are other options available for commuters anyway. It's a bit different if you work in an industry that uses fuel. But I don't believe that is the first place we should be looking to help the cost of living.
Okay, Steve.
Yeah, duty on products is an interesting one, because when you look at fuel, the differences that we've had in the price of the pumps over the last 12 months has been quite amazing. When we get to budget time and people argue over a penny or 2p a litre on fuel duty, and then you compare what's happened in the last 6 months, the two just don't, they're black and white. So actually tinkering with duty when prices are going up by 10, 15, 20 pence a litre is a very small thing. The cost of living is going to be a massive issue in the next 12 months. And I think government have got to find ways of helping those that can afford the least. So those on low incomes are going to need more help. Those that are really struggling financially are going to need more help. But at the same time, we've got to look at the way we move around the island. And if you want to drive a very large 4x4 and you're on your own, I think you should expect to pay more for that privilege.
Piers?
I think we've actually been in a golden opportunity in relation to also achieving carbon neutral goals, where we've got the opportunity to potentially reduce the cost of the biofuels, leaving the regular fuels as they are, but actually dropping the cost of biofuels and actually helping now a lot of the vehicles on the island transition across to a more carbon-friendly method of actually moving around the island. So it's saving cost at the pumps for the people using it, transition across, and we're actually able to meet some of our carbon goals as well. So I think we are in a unique opportunity, and it'll be interesting to see how we can develop that as it moves forward.
Okay.
I don't think that taking tax on fuel at the moment is the right answer to the cost of living crisis, but I definitely agree with Stephen that we need to help the people at the lower end of the scale, because things are going to get extremely difficult. We're going to have a massive increase in food costs. And I also agree that if you've got a massive 4x4, that you should be paying more than someone who's trying to get to work, or if you're a carer that's having to get around to different jobs on the island, you're looking after different people in their homes, it's very difficult to get the bus. So it's a bit of a different for everybody, isn't it? It's not a one size fits all solution, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Sinead Peacock-Brennan has asked a question. She said, what would you do to improve mental health and well-being across the population? That first goes to Carolyn.
Well, this government have put in more money because it was recognised that the provision that was inadequate on this island, and there is obviously a greater demand post-lockdown. There are facilities that have been set up, like the listening lounge, but so that the funding is going the right direction. Whether it's adequate enough, I don't know, because that's just been put in. But yeah, I wouldn't really know what else to suggest until we've seen that provision come about.
Okay, Steve.
Well, if Carolyn says they've been putting more money into mental health, they haven't been putting enough money into mental health, because especially our young people need a huge amount more help. The percentages of children at school that are seeking mental health guidance far, far too high. A lot of the facilities that we should be providing, we don't have. COVID's been a challenge. A lot of people in those services left and haven't come back. But all across our population, we need more we need to address mental health. We need to address mental health in the same way that we address physical health. People need to understand that it's a problem that needs assistance, just like a physical issue is when you go to A&E. So we do need to really invest in it, because social media and the internet is going to give us some big issues with mental health in the decades to come.
Piers.
As Steve has said, it's not something which is obvious, and a lot of mental health, a lot of people won't actually know they are suffering from it, and they'll have their own coping mechanisms. So as much as it's a case of providing services that those who do recognise it or have been identified can access, we also need to look at what causes are on the island, which are actually increasing stress, whether that's work pressure, cost of living, home life pressures, the environment. Everyone can be affected differently when it comes to mental health, but as an island, we can actually look at improving better landscapes people can access, make sure that they're aware of the resources that they can access as well, and also education actually within school with children of how to identify mental stress, and where do you go to actually help cope with that.
Thank you, Rose.
Oh, I think the mental health provision over here is pretty dire. We haven't got enough psychiatrists. And I sometimes wonder about the quality of some of them. I think the project at St Saviour's Hospital, I have watched it go up. I could have built it more quickly myself. It is being left on the back burner. Nobody's interested. The current Minister for Mental Health is totally disinterested. I find it's actually quite upsetting for people with mental illness. I know perhaps it's slightly moving away from mental health, but there were provisions for like the access to a farm, a trip to France, and other provisions, and all those things have been shut down. And no one, I think, has any interest in the provision that is being made up at Overdale Hospital. It's very, very much an afterthought stuck in front of the crematorium.
Okay, thank you, Guy.
Well, let me start by saying that I regret that I've done very little research into mental health issues for younger people, but I'm very familiar with dementia issues amongst the elderly, and the provisions for elderly people in this island with dementia are not great. And I say again, many of those people have been looked after by members of the family, hundreds of cases like that. And their help is in many respects even less. It's an issue that needs addressing. It's going to become, certainly in terms of mental health issues amongst the elderly, they're going to be more of it. Dementia happens to roughly 1 in 8 people over a certain age. And we simply don't have sufficient facilities just for them alone.
Thank you very much, Guy. Moving on now back to economy. There's a lot of questions coming in about the cost of living, etc. And Julian Cousins has asked, would the candidates support progressive taxation if Guernsey also went along with this change? So that goes to Steve, doesn't it, first this time?
Taxation is quite often a matter of competitive jurisdictions, and a lot of times you will find people look at the various places that they could put their money before they make decisions. It's interesting that you asked the question about Guernsey, would they lead the way, would we follow, or would we start first? Progressive taxation is an interesting one to go for. And certainly, to my mind, we need to look at our top earners and we need to talk to them about how we can work better with them. I'm not going to say we're going to turn around and tax them all over the place, but I think what we could do is have a sensible conversation with people who earn more money, should we say, and see how we can make things fairer and better for the island so our tax take doesn't get impacted and the government, whoever they are, have money in the exchequer to spend on the services provided by islanders. As I said some time ago, there's a big gap between.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to have to apologise. I don't know enough on the topic to make a comment on that one, but I'll make a note of it and go away and do my research.
Okay, Rose?
I would like to see that the rich people, the 2-1Es that come into this island are actually paying the tax that they should be paying. I've heard that perhaps on some occasions they aren't, and I think that they should be paid more of a percentage of their income that they are currently doing.
Thank you, Guy.
I'm not a supporter of progressive taxation. I think it fundamentally undermines capitalist economic systems. It's I don't know whether it's just a socialist idea or not, but it strikes me that if you have a flat rate tax and the people are earning more money, they're paying more tax. So why you suddenly want to load it even more heavily the higher the salary you get? I'm old enough to remember when there was something in the United Kingdom called super tax. It was 98%. That's progressive taxation. It didn't work then, it won't work now.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I think in these times, the cost of living's soaring, I think it's time that we did ask our 2-1E residents to pay more, to pay a fairer share. At the moment, they pay 145,000 flat rate plus 1% of their worldwide income. And those are the new ones, the ones that have been here many, many years, historic ones. I don't think they pay that. So I would look to them to pay a fairer share. I would also look to increase tax thresholds to help those on a much lower income, so that they can get a tax break that way and help with the cost of living.
Okay, thank you. And you've both touched on the subject of wealthy immigrants, because Jane has asked, would you reduce the number of wealthy immigrants entering the island? Would you restrict the properties that they can buy and the enormous development of such properties that seems to be allowed at the moment? That goes first to Piers.
I would definitely be happy to look into restricting what extra land they can buy on top of the properties that they purchase. I'm aware of some properties where they very quickly bought up the agricultural land around those properties and changed their use out of the commercial agriculture, which I do not think is right. So there are elements that I would definitely be happy to look at to ensure we can actually protect the land for what it's meant to be.
Thank you.
Yes, I think we ought to look at how many people we are letting in. It seems to me it's more and more and more each year. And I am also very concerned that it seems to me that if you are one of these residents, you are much, much more likely to get what you want from the planning department than anybody else. And I think it is not right.
Thank you, Guy.
Piers, I think, is hit the nail on the head there. There is an issue with our very wealthy immigrants, as it were, buying up the island, buying up additional properties, certainly buying up land and changing its use. That is causing issues, certainly for the agricultural community, among others. I'm not so convinced about limits. As far as I know, there are some limits at the moment, but we need to look at this in hard economic terms, and that is that one household can probably produce as much tax as an entire street in St Helier. So think on that.
Thank you. Carolyn?
I wouldn't be in favour of restricting the numbers, but if the rate of tax was put up to what we consider reasonable or fairer share, I think we'd probably see some of them leave anyway. So, you know, if they feel that they get a better deal from Guernsey, then so be it. I totally agree with Piers. I don't like it when they sort of seem to buy up all the land around their houses and still suggest that it's for agriculture because they grow a couple of apple trees in it. I think that's totally wrong. No, and especially now when we're going to start facing food shortages, our agricultural field should really be for agriculture.
Thank you. And Steve?
I wouldn't want people to get the impression that 2-1s are not good for the island, because the very vast majority of them do huge amounts of philanthropic work. They work with charities. They're private people who come over here for a quiet time. And in many cases, they don't want anybody to know what they're doing with their money. But let me assure you, people, that a lot of good comes from the 2-1es that come over here. But there are two things I would say. The first one is the cost of the property they are allowed to buy at the moment starts, I think, at 1.75 million. That is far, far too low. That's in direct competition with many people on this island. We've got to raise that limit. So if you want to be a 2-1e and come to Jersey, you have to spend a lot more money. And the other thing I would say is this: we're letting or allowing too many of them to come onto the island. We need to reduce that, and we need to have less of them coming every year. So we must set a lower limit for those that are coming onto the island.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to very quickly ask you all one last question, because you are from the Grouville and St Martin constituency, and just say, what would you do for your constituency? What would be the first thing, or what do you think your primary thing is for doing for the constituency? And that is going to Rose first, isn't it?
Oh gosh. I have to be honest, I have not thought about the primary thing to do for the constituency. I know there's some issues over parking at Gorey and people getting fined if they park their cars in a car park on bank holidays. Then I'd probably have a look at that one first.
Okay, thank you, Guy.
I'm afraid this is going to kick up in Grouville, but I would like to take back control of our interstitial tidal waters, which is currently run by an outfit called Ramsar, which is a bureaucratic office, if I recall right, in Switzerland. Ramsar actually had nothing to do with interstitial tidal areas when it kicked off, and Ramsar is in fact a town in Iran, and the whole concept was developed in order to muck around with Saddam Hussein, who was persecuting Marsh Arabs. I would like to take control back from Ramsar and put it back in the hands of Jersey.
Okay, thank you. Carolyn.
I think there are some community initiatives that, for example, I run the community support group in Grouville. I've spoken to the Constable of St Martin, and she has felt that she'd like one too in St Martin, so I'd be more than happy to set something like that up. So there are community initiatives that I would be happy to share.
Thank you, Steve.
When I was first elected 11 years ago, I said I wanted to help deliver affordable housing, retirement homes, the new school, make use of the old school, and provide some facilities for parishioners in the form of doctor's surgeries, We've also got a vet and a very successful supermarket in the old school now, and I'd like to continue to do more of the same. We need more facilities. I'd like to help provide those facilities in Grouville as well as I can. If people can walk somewhere and they don't have to go in a car, the better. People like to stay close to home. So for me, community facilities is top of the list.
Thank you. Finally, Piers.
As I've kind of already mentioned this evening, one big one I do want to sit down with both parishes is actually looking forward to the Island Plan for 2025 and start now looking for sites, whether brownfield, greenfield, where we can look at them, but also sites that we can look at protection, and we want to bring forward in the next Island Plan to increase their protection on it, particularly our fantastic wetlands that we've got in Grouville and wooded valleys as well in St Martin.
Okay, thank you very much. And it is a big thank you to all candidates. Simon has said all good candidates tonight, wishing you all the best of luck. So let's thank you to Rose Binet, independent, Guy Fay, another independent, and Carolyn Labbe, the same. To Steve Luce from Progress Party, and to Piers Sangon from another independent. And as I've mentioned before, Philip Leclerc is another candidate, but he wasn't with us this evening. And of course, a big thank you to you at home for asking your questions. And don't forget, you can go to the parish hustings as well, and you can get all the information on vote.je. Thank you for joining us this evening.